evening and welcome to the 15th meeting of fiscal year 2017 for the Milton Planning Board. I'm Brian First, Chair of the Planning Board. I'm going to have the other members and people at the table introduce themselves, starting on my right.
Alex Whiteside, I'm a member.
William Clark, Planning Director.
Tim Zerwinski, Assistant Town Planner.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
And this gentleman here is Mike Kelly, member.
Present.
All right, excellent. We have a couple more meetings this month, currently scheduled February 9th and February 16th. And I don't believe we have any meeting minutes to approve, do we? The meeting's minutes were distributed with Alex's comments from, I don't know.
Might as well wait till next.
Yeah, when we have April here, so we'll wait on that.
Okay. That's fine. You'll have these packets that I just gave out have copies of the January 26th minutes,
Okay.
so you can check
We're
those
not
out.
supposed to touch those, correct?
Touch them when you get home and,
All right.
and read it closely.
Tonight we're talking about 131 Elliott Street. We'll be signing the special permit and having a brief discussion beforehand. And we're discussing the zoning articles for the Maytown meeting, which are Ice House and the Carberry Estate. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to any issue other than those three issues this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move beyond citizen speak. And we're going to go right into 131 special permit, 131 Elliott Street special permit. Tim, you gave that to me and I've already lost it.
Oh, I took all
took
the
it
copies
back?
back,
Okay.
yeah.
We have the signature pages,
We do have the signature pages.
and we,
I'll quickly address one change that was that came up this week due to a height restriction in the zoning bylaw. We have eliminated the requirement for the 11-foot clear height on the first floor so that we don't inadvertently create a problem with the 75-foot maximum height on the building. In its place, in order to continue to promote the desire for retail at this site, which was acknowledged by the property owner and the board at the last hearing, we've put in a requirement for 50% of that first floor space to be retail. And the applicant did agree with that. After 6 months from substantial completion, if they're not able to get a retail tenant, they'll come back to the board and they can get a waiver from that requirement. That is the only change from what we have already discussed.
Did you say the height of the first floor changed from 11 feet to?
It just doesn't say 11 foot clear anymore. So it says it will still be 11 feet, it just doesn't specify that it will be 11 feet to the bottom of the joist.
I move that we execute the permit as stated.
Okay?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Tim?
April voted in the affirmative for this, but she's not here.
She doesn't, as long as we have four
You have
signatures.
4
we're
signatures,
okay.
is that,
That's sufficient.
That
If she
doesn't-
wants to sign it, she can come sign it after the fact, but
okay,
we'd only need the 4.
that's all. Today's the 2nd, right?
You do have to make that adjustment, right? You're going to make that one adjustment that we talked about?
Yes.
Just, okay, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Yep, today is the 2nd. And it's 6 more weeks of winter, according to the groundhog.
I keep forgetting a blue pen. so
That
can you
was a
pass the
good
pen along with
discussion.
it?
Now are we going to
Only
vote?
one blue pen, so.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
This one's actually.
We had a nice discussion about that, including the groundhog. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Of what?
If
To sign the
executing the
permit.
special permit.
I thought you were still talking about the groundhog.
Brian, do you have blue?
Yeah. Thank you for the reminder, Alex.
All right. I've got a blue pen for this. Oh, and just briefly, let me say that we've got a lot of people to thank for this, and Katie Conlon is one of them. Senator Joyce is another one, and Anne Marie is a third. And then there is a host of other people who made this all possible. And I meant to write all their names down, and I forgot.
And
But I do thank them.
you are also on that list, so thank you for all your hard work on this as well. It's a good ending to a long story. Okay, we're next going to discuss the zoning articles. We're going to start with the Carberry Estate tonight so that Cheryl doesn't need to wait in the wings afterwards. So Carberry Estate applicants can come forward to sit at the table if they wish, and we'll begin our discussions as soon as everyone has signed their paperwork. It is a little chilly in here.
It's cool, yeah.
Blowing right at me, yeah, right here.
If you're gonna handle this.
I'm a wimp. I guess.
Wake up with a
You
sore
do it
neck
on
tomorrow.
purpose, actually. We want to move this meeting along
I'm
tonight.
happy to go as quickly as we can. And so Ned Corcoran, on behalf of Northland Residential, I know that Jack Dolly is on his way. He's got a close friend who's difficult straits in the hospital. Jack was with him a little while ago, so I know he's on his way here, but he'll catch up when he gets here.
Tim, could you tell us again, I know you put it, we should have 3 copies of this in front of us?
So I distributed some packets that have, if we're talking about Great State PUD building.
Yes.
2 copies.
Okay.
One we received from attorney Kurt Connors yesterday.
Yep.
That should say Connors edit with a date tag on the top. And then just this afternoon, we got some edits based on, I believe they were based on Cheryl's comments that were distributed for the last meeting. That doesn't have a label on it, but it does have JD1 tags in the right margin. So we can jack those.
Okay.
So those are the 2 edits that we put in front of you.
Okay.
Well, I've got Cheryl's red line copy.
Do we have that? We have that as well, except it has JD on it, so this is, okay.
Yeah, and then you should have had that from last week.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, okay.
But I like using Cheryl's comments,
Great.
especially since I thought that they advanced matters significantly.
Great.
And I have, let's see, I have something maybe. This is something about affordable housing, and let's see, I made 5 copies. So that would mean that that the staff doesn't get one.
You can have mine afterwards.
Okay, but that, I'll discuss that in due course.
So Cheryl, do you want to walk us through, since it's your copy?
Okay.
So
Or,
I mean,
go ahead, Tim.
I mean, for the sake of convenience, I mean, I can go back and bring up the one that just has Cheryl's. I'm bringing up the Jack Dolly comments one, these are purple
fine.
up on the top. Cheryl, if you can confirm that you're the red comments.
Yeah, just want to look and see.
I think it makes sense to go through all the comments at once as well, so we might as well have the.
You're just going to review them,
Correct.
So does,
rather than try and determine whether we like them or not.
Yeah, like, we can make notes, that's fine, instead of trying to change it up there.
Well, I mean, if we don't
We have a
like
public
it,
hearing
if
anyway,
we
right.
don't like it, we don't have to say so, but you should, I like what Cheryl did.
I agree, and I just don't need to keep up tonight, Tim, so. we
all right,
can-
so I just want to try and understand. So I put in number 2. Oh, no, I didn't do anything in the definition. Yeah, okay, so Jack is purple in this, and I'm
Yes.
red. Okay,
Yes.
that's fine to look at it up there. I think it's easier to have it in color.
Yes,
I think it's-
Much
yeah,
easier.
yeah.
much easier.
Talk to the warrant committee about a bigger color printer budget.
Great.
All right. so-
Maybe we could use it to do the zoning and use the 15,000 for that.
There he is. We're working on that, Alex.
All right, so
I have a comment here about the pre-1900 houses.
Okay,
And that is that the house in the middle, the Devon's house, apparently was built in the 30s or possibly the 40s, but it has a piece of it that goes back to the 1800s. And it's a pretty nice looking, I thought it was an old house, but it turns out that it just had a talented architect. And talented architects, as you know, Cheryl, can do wonders. But I thought that that house, if you look at your plan, which you probably have in easy reach,
which one is that, Alex, on the plan here that you're talking about?
I think it's Ken Jr.'s house.
It is.
if you look at,
It's the one that's right in the middle driveway. The current plan has building number 1 sitting on top of it.
Okay.
right, exactly. And
All right.
if you take out building number 1 and leave that, the first thing you would hit as you went up this driveway would be the this rather nice looking colonial revival house.
I remember it now, okay.
So I think that that's, I've run it by a few people, and they said, well, it may not be historic, but it's nice.
Well, the thing is, we want to make sure that we have retained the Walcott House, right?
Right.
And then also the Manor House, or you suggest, yeah, so do we want 3 structures or 2 structures?
Look, I mean, if there are 3 structures, if we don't want this one saved, it's easy enough not to save it. It just seems to me that if we had a picture, you'd see that it's really one of the,
I may have one here.
it's a nice looking house.
Okay, well, are you suggesting that we put
I'm
3
su-
in there
I'm-
rather than
Well,
2?
I'm suggesting that we give some serious thought to having it be the first, as you drive up
Yeah.
there, the first thing you hit is this rather nice colonial, which actually, someone suggested could be made into a double, a 2 condo building, so you wouldn't necessarily lose, once again, with a talented architect.
This house you see from Canton Ave right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's except for the Manor House, it's the second most visible.
Yeah, you don't see the governor's house at all.
No, the Governor's House is
think they're the only 2 you do
totally
see.
hidden.
Yeah.
yeah, but I guess my thought about it is, I wouldn't want to necessarily include that one at the expense of one of the other 2.
Why
I
why would you? If the zoning says keep all 3,
That's what I mean, I would rather have it say, keep all 3.
right.
Yes. I agree with you, if the intent is to
No,
change it
I
to 3.
mean, it isn't which one is the odd house out. It's,
Yeah.
it's that it seems to me that it would be a good idea to keep all 3. I had really thought that this was, and sort of the original place where the people back in the 1800s had done whatever they did in the 1800s, but one could visualize that.
Well, given that they've got a structure right on top of that location,
Right.
it seems it would be reasonable to save that one. So, I agree with you.
All right, well, let's keep going.
I remind Ned that we asked for the square footages here for these homes. So I know Jack acknowledged that and said he would try to get them to us.
According to the town
Apparently all
records.
3.
According to the town records, the manor house is 1,800, 8,100 square feet, 8,125.
Okay.
8125?
Yeah. The, of finished area. The Walcott house is finished area of 4,464 square feet.
Was it 4464, you said?
4,464. This is according to the tax assessor's records.
Do you have Devon's there?
And the Devon's appears to be 4121
Okay.
square feet, built in 1940.
Okay.
The house was built about 1875, and the Walcott was built about 1890. I think Jack's perspective on the, what he calls Ken Jr.'s house, or the Devon's house, is that if the board would like him to try to save it, he's happy to try and do that. He hasn't given a lot of thought to it, because he really hasn't spent any time sort of thinking specifically about that one. But it's certainly something that, we've heard a little bit of comment from some in the neighborhood that they're used to seeing it. And so having something there that they're used to seeing might be a good thing as well. So I think he's open to saving it. He doesn't know the condition inside and what it could be done to.
That one's currently occupied, though,
That's
right?
occupied by Ken Carberry Jr.
Okay.
Okay.
So if we go back up to the other things that Jack had added.
We only got it today, so
I just wanted to
we
get the
can,
idea
we
of it,
can,
yeah.
we can
Okay.
run through this
Okay.
again.
All right. So then on number 2 there. So
He's just clarifying the benefits to the project, which I think is fine.
this would be to scrap the whole thing up there and replace it? Is that what he's suggesting? Do you know, Ned? Where he says alternate language that he pulled from a different one?
I think he's pulled it because it's another example of similar language, but he's really the board's pleasure on this.
Okay. I'll have to look at it.
Because there's nothing in here that age restricts it? Is that right?
Not from a
At the moment?
purpose standpoint.
No, I think it's, age restriction is elsewhere.
Right, okay. All right, well, we'll have to
Have to read that.
think about that, right?
Yep.
No, we want an overview, and it seems to me we want to see if we can't figure out how many units we're going to be comfortable with. I mean, that seems to me to be the big issue
Okay,
that we have to,
decide,
with any luck, decide today.
okay. All right. I was just looking at the comment about whether we wanted to actually list how many historic structures. I think one of the purposes is to make sure that the structures are preserved, so I think we do have to be specific. Do
Well,
you-
no,
Agree?
that
Yeah.
would bear some changing, and,
Okay.
and, you know, what I hear is that it's doable.
Okay,
And so that's all we need to determine right now. We don't need to craft
okay.
language.
Move on.
Right, exactly.
So I think in 3 and 6, there's a recommendation that both the acreage be a little bit less specific. I assume that's due to making sure that this is not two site specific, and that's in 3. And then leaving the calculation as a ratio per buildable area as opposed to a specific number of units. I would assume that that's, again, for the same reason. So just, I call that to the board's attention, that that's being called out by.
But that's, you know, I mean, I don't think that anyone is going to care if we do it that way. I mean, I'd assume we'd say 45 acres
Right, exactly.
and figure out.
Figure out the ratio.
Figure out the ratio of, once we determine how many units,
Fine with me.
we can get to a ratio.
And then, just for the sake of going through everything at once, I'm looking at Mr. Connor's comments here. Under number of units, you know, just reiterating, he says the neighborhood as a whole supports only a maximum of 44 units. So that's just a note on
We
that.
skipped any other comments here?
There was a question about
Yeah, we just did
defining
that.
the footprints
Yeah, we
of
just
the
did that
existing
with the square
structures.
footage, okay.
So this, but he does have a comment in number 7, but we are at number 7 now, right? So what was, I mean, I had put in, suggested that a limitation on how much could be built in this whole zone so that we would get something kind of similar to this kind of a site plan.
Now, this gets, I said that I came to a conclusion about something, and
Is this it?
it's probably just, well, to say what it is now. We did discuss a development plan last time around, and a development plan can be, as you say, it can be meticulous, sort of like a construction drawing, or it can be less meticulous, but still, I mean, a development plan should say, take a look at Exhibit A, and this is what we're going to build. And Exhibit A would be that sheet there. And it does seem to me that when we go into town meeting, it does seem to me it's almost impossible to zone that. Leaving it open is something that will lose a number of people who don't want it open. They want to know what they're going to get. So it does seem to me that we can approve zoning as specific as we can make it, and then have it supplemented by a development agreement with even more specifics, and probably containing this plan. And if there is the possibility that this plan might be changeable, the development agreement could say just how it would be changed. So what would happen is the development agreement would say, if this zoning passes, this is what we'll build, and be very specific as to, or as specific as they can be, as specific as we can determine is what the people want, rather than leave it open, because I know that when a developer comes in with a plan, it's real hard to say this plan is no good at all. We're going to throw it out. What usually happens, or what has always happened while I've been on the planning board, is that we've tinkered around the edges of the plan. But we've never thrown out a plan saying this plan is no good, go back to the drawing boards. So we're
Right.
going to want
Go ahead.
them to start with something that we want, if we know what we want.
My concern, Alex, is that because it's more a diagram than a plan, and that we've asked for there not to be excessive cut,
Yeah.
that not excessive tree removal,
Yeah.
you know, and it might be that that plan could be adjusted to fit the topography better, to fit, and it might not be quite as orderly as it is there. My concern is we won't know that at the time that that development agreement would be signed. And so we would be locked into a plan that we don't know that can be
We
actually
wouldn't
better.
necessar- We could
So-
say that adjustments can be made to minimize cuts and fills.
Well, it would be, I would still like to see the three-dimensional model. I'd still like to see the site sections and the cut and fill analysis and the tree analysis and all the things that
We-
would come
That's part
that
of the
takes
special,
time to do.
but that's part of the special permit.
Yeah, but you would, if you said this is the plan that we're going to get through the development agreement, then some of that's required is only going to just provide more information to confirm this.
I would argue that we have nothing to do with the development agreement. We're writing the zoning. And to Alex's point, I think Alex makes, I think you're bringing forward a plan to town meeting, and perhaps it's the Board of Selectmen that's saying, the Board of Selectmen is choosing to endorse this application for zoning, or this zoning article, excuse me, based on the fact that we have a development agreement with the developer that's going to look like this, and they've attested to that. And now it's the developer has a plan with the Board of Selectmen, now he's got to come back to the planning board and figure out how to make that plan work within the context of this zoning. So he's got two different documents with two different agencies he has to work with. It's just like but I don't think we should have anything to do with the development agreement.
So then it just sets up okay, when something gets agreed to eventually for the special permit, if it doesn't match the development agreement, people who were party to that development agreement are going to wave red flags.
Well, then
And
he's
we're
got to go
gonna-
back to the Board of Selectmen and negotiate his development agreement to fit with whatever the zoning's going to allow for. But that gives the Board of Selectmen the opportunity to tweak that development agreement in a public process without going back to town meeting.
I think the flip side of what you're saying is, just because they have a development agreement doesn't mean they're going to get a permit.
Well, that's exactly what, that is
And
exactly
that's,
right.
when you're saying they're independent,
I think there's a whole lot of angst here for no reason. The development agreement will be a tighter set of exhibits that drill into what's being authorized under the zoning, that will be reviewed and understood by the neighbors and agreed to by the selectmen. It will be a more detailed approach to what's being authorized under the zoning. We're very comfortable that we'll go from a zoning bylaw to a development agreement to an application for special permit, and it will be a straight line set of more detailed specifications. The development agreement can say what will need to be done with respect to a cut and fill analysis, and how it will have to be done.
You
What will
can't
need-
do that before town meeting, Ned. There's no way you can get all those
You
drawings.
can't.
No, you can't either.
We
There's
can
no
do.
way you can get all those drawings
No,
done.
we can describe what and how it will be done in more detail than what's provided for under the zoning. We won't have a full cut, we'll have some, but we won't have a full cut and fill analysis done. There's a whole lot of stuff that will have to be done post-zoning, but we'll have the start of a three-dimensional plan, because we've begun working on that. We've got the start of a cut and fill analysis because we've been working on that. But we'll have a detailed set of requirements as to how it will be met. We've got a 6-page draft of a construction management plan that would be attached to the exhibit that will talk about time of day of construction, what you can do on weekends and what you can't do, when deliveries can be made. All of those things that aren't in the zoning, but which are detailed requirements that have to be paid attention to as you move forward into the special permit process.
It's my opinion that our job as the planning board is to put together good zoning. If the town believes that they need to have a development agreement to sell it to town meeting, then that's the applicant and the Board of Selectmen to figure out. Our job is to come up with good zoning.
Okay, well then I still would like to have some percentage of this is an amount allowed, because one of the reasons I support this.
I'm sorry, amount of what? I don't understand. Can you just,
All right, so
I didn't understand what you're saying,
So
yeah.
I had suggested that, I think it was only 25% of the area in the first 550 feet could contain
Mm-hmm.
units. And the reason for that is that one of the reasons I support this kind of clustered development here is to preserve this view shed. My feeling from a zoning point of view is if you allow too much in this front zone, which the 250-foot setback doesn't do anything to limit this zone, then we could very well potentially have a site plan come along which loses these things. And, one of the other things that we talked about, whether it's septic or sewer, and that impacts tree coverage, et cetera. And until that's perked and everything, we won't know exactly where those things are. So my feeling is still, I would like to have, whether it's 25% or a different percent, I would like to have some kind of percentage rather than take it out entirely and think that it's going to be covered in the development agreement.
Why not just cover it in the development agreement and say, go to the plan and...
Because I'm listening to what Brian suggests, which is that we want to cover the zoning.
I disagree with Brian. I think that it is our purpose to be as specific as we can, and designing the building is something we're going to do eventually. We might as well do it now. As with I mean, we have all this stuff about design in it. If we have nothing to do with design, get rid of it and just say, come in with whatever you want, and we'll ask the selectmen if they like it.
No, I think we should keep all the things in, and I also think we should keep something in about limiting how much can be built in that front.
I think we should have a development agreement that says, see this green space, keep it. See this green space, keep it.
I agree with that, but I don't think it should be from us. I just
Well,
don't.
I mean, the selectmen are not going to do it. And if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. Or,
I'm getting-
they may do it,
I
but,
think you're back to what Brian said, that I don't think we're going to have that done by,
well, it's
Right.
doable. It doesn't have to be, it isn't
No.
surgery, it just needs the,
I mean, the reason I say it's not going to be done by then, too, is that there's a lot of expense in advancing the things that we talked about advancing, which is next steps. Hello, Mr. Dolly.
Hello, I'm sorry.
It's a level of work that I understand that they're going to want to have some sense that there's a path forward on this before they engage all of those consultants, and I understand that completely. So that's why I said to getting it done, not just even the time period, the months that it are between now and town meeting, but just the expenditures on something that's an unknown. So if they feel as if a development agreement is something that they can and should work out, fine. But I still think we should zone it such that we can, without that agreement, we could get as close as we want or can.
So
the plan
you
that
have
we think
language
is
in here about the
appropriate.
25%.
so you're saying we get to design the project, is what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying
You
that.
are, you're saying it gets as close to what we want. The zoning has to give us the ability to get to what we want.
What we want is a preservation of viewscape and green space. That's typically you can put in the zoning. You don't need a development agreement to guarantee you
I
that.
understand that, but what if they put units in front of this other house? I mean, you can say no units in front of the other house in the zoning if you want to, but it's so much easier saying, take a look at the plan, stick with this. You know, they did not just come up with this as saying, show me where the lot lines are, and then stick these things through. They've actually done some work on these cuts and fills and where a road might go. It may not be perfect, but you have standards which they have to observe.
Well, I still feel the way I do. I guess we can decide how all 4 or 5 of us eventually feel on that. Maybe we should think about the next
I mean,
piece.
the zoning can't do it unless you can come up with language that does it. That said, this field here.
Well, like I said, if they do that and they do the development agreement, fine, but I still think we should think about the zoning in a way that makes sense to us.
Yeah, I think the zoning makes sense because, like a lot of things, sometimes when you're specific, sometimes it helps you and sometimes it hurts you. How specific the zoning is somewhat, very significant, but you still have to pass muster with the planning board on the zoning to get your special permit.
We have never dumped a project because we don't like it. Never.
Well, I'm not certain what you're saying. If we don't
I'm
like the
simply
first
saying
version of it, we can
if-
have it revised.
But how many
Doesn't
times has the
happen.
zoning been
Doesn't
specific at all, except recently? The attached cluster zoning, which could have been an alternative to this approach, is wide open. It says X amount of squares, open space, this setback,
And not nearly as many
Go
units
do
as
it.
this either, though.
It isn't that many units. It's a greater density than this,
The cluster bylaw?
attached cluster.
The which,
Quistit Brook.
but that's a separate zoning than would apply here.
You've put
Right.
in that there's a 25% restriction. You have, no more than 25% of the townhouse units may be constructed less than 550 feet from the road.
That's just based on this plan. I mean, but,
I understand, but if they move the,
But what else are we going to build, Cheryl? We're not going to build another plan. We're going to build this plan.
right, so I guess I'm not understanding that there's a problem with that language.
no, I think,
Is
think
there a
the
problem
language
with
is
the
fine.
language?
No,
With
I have
what
no problem with
language?
the language.
Okay,
I
Which
think the language
language?
is fine.
25%.
the 25% language.
I mean, it's the first I'm seeing it.
And
but-
number 7.
Well, that was in the one that you marked
Oh,
up, right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't, okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
it's been a long day. I'm sorry, I have no problem.
Okay.
We've agreed, Jack has provision in here that says that the first 75 feet off the road, there'll be basically no disturbance,
Yeah.
which is consistent with, his discussion about a no-touch zone.
And you have that, and these units can go anywhere with no more than 25%.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Well, then, what's the,
you can still have the development agreement.
I mean, if we walk in the door,
yes.
You can do both, Alex.
if Jack
I
walks,
think, I fully, I think we're on the same page.
I'm
You
on the
can
same
do
page.
both.
I'm fine with
I'm
doing
fine
both.
with that, if that's what I was trying to say. I didn't want to take it out of here.
I think maybe I'm lost then, because I think the development agreement comes back to us, in my understanding.
Well, that's where I get uncomfortable.
Realistic understanding, I mean, who are the selectmen gonna go to
Right.
to look at their side of the development agreement and say, is this the agreement we should agree to?
No, I agree with you there.
It would be, the development agreement is simply stuff that we're not going to put into the zoning because people think it's too specific.
Fine.
And there are those who want the zoning to be more general. I mean, if we could be specific enough to come up with this field, which I've thought about it, and I haven't come up with the language, but maybe you can. It's not, we know what we want to preserve, and here's a picture of it.
Do you agree that the planning board gets involved with this development
Oh,
agreement?
absolutely, we write it.
All right, then if we write it, then again, I'm at a loss here. We sit here for weeks and weeks going through a bylaw. Now you're telling me you're going to create
We
to
have
a
it.
document that's intensely more specific, and what are we going to do that in one night?
Yeah.
Well, I don't understand that.
I think,
Apparently, there's a development agreement out there already that exists or something.
No.
Because I don't know how you're going to do it in one night.
well,
when it takes us-
look, the zoning isn't done yet. I mean,
Exactly.
but the zoning, if you don't have a development agreement, you have to do something to guarantee this space will be produced.
Mike, the warrant committee would have nothing to do with it. They wouldn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the development agreement. So the timing is certainly more generous
Than the
if you
zoning.
need to develop a development agreement because you don't have to hit that March 1st date. You have up until the night of town meeting to figure out.
So
your
it has no
development.
impact on the town meeting. The town meeting just is going to vote on the bylaw, and they're not even
Well, I
there
mean,
about it.
no, the argument for getting it done before town meeting is you're bringing to town meeting zoning that's not as specific as some people are going to want it. But you're going to have it in your back pocket, you're going to say, we're bringing forward this based on the development plan that runs to the land that was signed by the landowner, and this is what they're going to
So
build.
does this zoning agreement appear in the town meeting?
Yes.
No.
Well, excuse me, may I, Chair, may?
Sure.
My markup this morning, and I apologize for the late hour of doing it, was to try to add specificity to some of what we're talking about or have talked about either as a community, board community, or a direct abutter community. If there, if we haven't captured everything and the 25% hasn't captured everything, then I'm certainly willing to take another swing at it. And if it doesn't lock down the preservation of something that we collectively deem appropriate to preserve, let's identify it and see if we can word it accordingly. And if there's a development agreement over there, but I was trying to make take spring off of Attorney Connor's, Alex's, and your comments, sort of, I'm, I guess, a bit of a practitioner on these things, so, and trying to meet that spirit. If I've missed the mark, it wasn't to be, to put a house in the field, per se, or have preserved the right to do that. So maybe it's the 25%, maybe it's a different dimension. I don't know. I haven't thought about it yet.
Well, I don't think we want units on the Manor House lawn,
Agreed.
and I don't see anything in the zoning that precludes that.
But I would suggest that if we come back 6 months from now with a plan that has units in front of the manor house, we're going to have a very hard time getting it approved.
Well,
So, you know, why?
I hear you say that, but I have seen
Then, Alex,
this-
I'll never
I have
practice
seen
in this town
board-
again.
I have seen the way the board operates for considerably longer than you have.
I know you have.
Okay,
And I've
so.
But I've had a number of things come before you, and nothing that's ever come before you has differed from what the board had set out in the zoning.
I understand that, and if
And I
the
don't- I'm
zoning
not worried-
doesn't say no units in front of the manor house, then, you know.
Then say it. Find a way to say it.
Well, you find a way to say it. I told you I'm having problems with that.
I'll take a swing at it.
You think, I just want to ask the last question, you think the bylaw could perhaps allow them to do things by right that we don't necessarily want to see happen?
I'm saying that they could come in with a plan that doesn't look anything like this under the zoning here that we have. And I am finding it very hard to figure out how one would zone something like this. And if you don't want to zone something like that, then you probably won't get it.
Well, I guess the question that we have to ask ourselves is, if a plan came forward which met the zoning and was demonstrably different from this, would we be able to reject it, right? So the language has to be...
You're saying the flip side of what I just said. If
Yes.
we create a bylaw and it allows them by right to do something we didn't foresee or
Right.
intend for them or want them to do, then would we be in a bad position?
Exactly.
I guess I'm starting to see the development agreement. I'm starting to read between the lines. Apparently, the development agreement is spot zoning.
It's not zoning, it's an agreement.
It's
a
very
legal
specific
agreement.
right here.
All
We're gonna
right,
do
it's
this.
spot zoning.
Well, certainly if it's not in the development agreement and it's in this document, it's spot zoning.
Well, no, the bylaw would allow more flexibility than the development
But the
agreement.
zoning-
So you could claim the bylaw is not spot zoning, but the development agreement, in other words,
So if we said, though, that a new plan came in and did not meet the purpose of the bylaw, then would we not be able to deny it? And if one of the purposes is to preserve certain viewscapes that we can maybe define better, is that not sufficient language?
Yeah. it
Is
would be
that not
sufficient.
spot zoning? If you define it saying, no, the manor house lawn viewscape shall be preserved in the zoning? Look, if you could do it in the zoning, I mean, I've thought about this. I've sat at
sure
the
you
table and I've looked at this plan and said, how would you do that? And I've also said that, you know, I'd like to have more standards, more specific standards regarding cutting and filling and removal of trees and
So what I
how
would-
that should be controlled.
So what I would like to be able to have, though, is to have the opportunity to have a plan be different than this, if through the work that we ask them to do, they can come up with a better plan. I don't want to be married to a plan before all of that work is done. That's my concern about locking it in the development agreement to this exact plan.
Don't you think that they're pretty well locked in?
Well, no, I think there's some room for, I mean, what if we, you know, if you get in there and you've got,
Look.
I don't know, this topography
Look,
in
if
here is
they-
very
if they
steep, and then we say
decide
no
that
retaining
it's
walls
too
or
hard
what
to
have
do
you.
this, let's do something else and put the units here, there, or whatever.
I mean,
And
this,
it meets the zoning. I mean, where's the ability to say, this is awful? And they said, look, you said that we could change it, and we did.
Well, then there's no reason for us to ask for any more information, Alex, if that's the plan, and that's the plan they're going to get to build.
Well,
That was the question I was about to ask that you're starting to explain. If these things run parallel, the development agreement and the bylaw, and it gets to a point where they say, well, you know, come today, we can't live up to this development agreement. We're done, see ya.
Yeah.
And we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll approach it from the bylaw. Or whatever given period of time.
the development agreement would have some teeth.
It must have some expiration.
Legal teeth. You know, it's an agreement. It can provide a number of things. But look, Cheryl, it seems to me that maybe they could come up with something better, but I think that we could then change the development agreement. If the development agreement says do this, and then they come up and say, look, we've got something even better, change the development agreement.
The development agreement apparently takes precedent over the bylaw for this piece of land.
Well, not if the zoning takes precedence. The development agreement says we're going to do this development under the bylaw. That's what the development agreement says, and you know that neighbors would be party to it, so that the town wouldn't be able to pull the rug out.
Again,
from
unless I
under
don't
them.
understand, then you, I guess you answered in the affirmative. The zoning says you could do a variable of things.
A ton of things.
But you're going to do that, so in my mind, the development agreement takes precedent, because we're not going to get some
Right, we're not gonna.
measured identification of what the bylaw says
This
we're
is
going to
what
get
we're going to
that.
get.
So it takes precedent over the bylaw
Right. but we
regarding
have-
this piece of plan, this land, and this plan.
Well, I mean, it fits within the bylaw.
Well, it definitely fits in, it's just very more specific, and it's going to live to its...
And I don't know how at that point you reject it.
Well, why?
Right.
When you get to the actual special permit
Why would
process.
we want to reject it?
Well, then it's just, then
You
you
just bypass the entire special
It's a
permit
foregone
process.
conclusion.
all the detail that you go through the special permit process is out the window,
Yeah.
because it won't be able to be done in time for the
No,
development,
it
in the
isn't.
development
We've got
agreement.
We've
No,
got
it's
the
not- that's
garage
not
doors
true.
to worry about, we've got the landscaping to worry about, we've got the cut and filling to worry about, we've got plenty to worry about rather than the general shape of the development.
But if the applicant says, but the development agreement says I can do this, and now you're asking me to do something that's more stringent than that development agreement, then where are we?
The development
Legally.
agreement will say that this is not, this isn't the half of it.
Development agreement cannot allow something to happen that is not authorized under the zoning. It will provide a clearer map to getting to sets of details associated with the development.
Okay, but let's just say, what Alex is talking about, this is the plan.
Right.
So you come in and you say, I've got to do, you know, a lot of retaining walls, I got to do a lot of cut and fill, I got to take a lot of soil off site, but that's how I can get you this plan. That's what I don't want to have happen. I want this plan to be able to adjust to not destroying the, and there's no way anybody in this room could tell me that they can guarantee that there's not going to be destruction with this plan. There's not enough work that's been done on it to guarantee it.
You've already talked about,
No, but
not the
but
garage
what-
is all facing this road, like,
Right.
and if you do that, you're going to have to use significantly more land there, because if you're going to have to enter garages from side versus front, and you're going to take up more space.
Well, they could come back and they could say, look, here's what our attempt to address the concern about the garages is, and here's the impact of that, right? So it's a design back and forth, and we need time to have that design back and forth. They need to do the work, we need to react to it, they need to revise it, we need to react to it. If that's the plan, that work doesn't need to be done. That's my concern.
Well, I have looked at what we've been doing with Pulte, and I haven't, I've seen that we've tinkered around the edges, but there are those who say that we should have said, no way on the whole thing, go back to the drawing boards, but we didn't do it, and in fact, we never even seriously indicated that we might do it. So I don't rest my case. It does seem to me that saying this is what they're going to do, and you can say if there is huge good cause to make minor adjustments so that you don't have tall retaining walls so that you don't do excessive cutting and filling, so you don't lose trees, so you don't do this, you don't do that. And then you'll have standards to apply when the time comes.
I think it's going to take, well, if we are to write it, it's going to take a lot of effort to write it.
What, the development agreement?
The agreement that this, that
It just, no,
that's
setting the standards is not the same as applying them. Once we have the standards, you are going to have to go and apply them.
Well, I think we should first focus on making the zoning as tight as best we can and not have it tip to the
I don't disagree.
spot.
I don't disagree with that, but look at the Manor House lawn and look at the zoning, and you know that there's nothing
gotcha.
in the zoning that says the Manor House lawn will be there at the end of the process. And a lot of people want it to be there at the end of the process, and we've sort of said to them, it will be there at the end of the
Well,
process.
there's a lot of heads
250
around this
feet will be
table that
there.
can think about some language that may or may not work, right? So maybe that's the way to address that, and then we can look at the other points. Okay, can we agree to do that?
Yes.
Which was, number of
Well-
units is what you wanted to. Now that Jack's here. Alex, because we skipped over number of units. I know you said you wanted to focus some attention on that, right?
We did. I think that, though, that we've got folks out there who want to, need to be given a chance to chime in before we
Do that one?
do that one.
Okay, fine. So we're going to go then to so
What are you looking for,
well, I'm
Cheryl?
just looking what was crossed out there under
This was moved.
moved.
Green was
Okay.
moved.
All right.
Ken Junior House.
Yeah, I got to look up here because it's easier to understand. So that was just the road piece, the road and building piece, right, that we had talked about these?
I don't think
Yeah.
we need to go through this line by line. We still have at least another public hearing that we have to get through. So I just want to make sure we are on the same page. So I think,
Right. I think we've hit the high points.
Yeah. Can we just scroll through them? So we're going to talk about affordable housing because you've given us some language, and then what?
Well, let me just say what I did with the affordable housing. It shouldn't take very long.
Okay.
I said that you can locate the 10% affordable, and you can locate them on site as part of the units on site. Say there are 58 units permitted on site, then 6 of those units would be affordable and 52 would be market. Or you can go off-site and,
Before you do that, on the on-site ones,
Yeah.
do you have it such that they have to be age restricted?
I don't know that you can have a age-restricted development which is not all age-restricted.
age-restricted.
I mean, I just don't know what the law is there. I tend to think it probably has to be entirely age-restricted.
I don't know what the law is.
I would guess, I would tend
That
to agree with you.
would be my guess.
Yeah, I would
So,
What I have seen is
You're
a
kind of
mix,
defeat the
that
purpose.
where bylaws have allowed some of both, but not uniquely one, uniquely another.
so
Good question. Okay, go
it
ahead.
would be, those would be 6 age-restricted units for people 55 or older. And then off-site units, I see building or buying 1s and 2s, probably 2s, fixing them up to code, a roof with at least 15 years of life, Everything in good repair, decent, safe, and sanitary. And then I have a page on how,
On those 6 off-site, they don't all have to be done at the same time, right? It would be spread out over the actual rest of the
I
development?
haven't, I would think that that would be the way to do it. I don't have the spread out on how they would be,
Okay.
how they
We
would
had
be.
proposed language that they would be produced at the same rate,
At the same
I
time?
mean,
so-
that makes sense.
one
Yeah.
for every 6, or one for every 10 units.
So these would be ownership units with the resident town employee preference. And they'd be nice units.
Yeah.
And
Did you have it that we would have to approve the locations of those units?
I didn't, no.
Because there was,
But that, I
a
mean,
concern
if
expressed.
we were to approve the location, presumably we would have to advertise that. And we would then have a hearing on whether or not to locate them at a particular site.
well, we did have some concern expressed,
That
by
what?
a member or members of the public about taking a requirement from one development and imposing that onto another part of town. And I do think we ought to be mindful of that and try and think of a way to,
We-
Have that
I mean,
concern
we
be
can have a
considered.
dispersal,
yeah,
a
something like that.
dispersal clause,
Yeah,
no more than,
Yeah.
well, it's ones and twos, dispersal clause. I mean, it's going to be, these are going to be,
would be nice, I agree
are
with
going to be nice units. They're going to be better units than they are now, and they're going to be ownership units. I mean, it probably will remove some rental housing from the stock, but there you are. And I don't know what to do about the town farm, because the town farm is for the poor, and I don't see how you could have ownership units rather than rental units on the town farm. So I'm thinking that maybe I'll try my hand at the town. I didn't get to the town farm, but
I think what you say makes sense, though, in terms of rental units on that parcel. I mean,
Why?
it's something to consider.
I don't understand, why would we have to even specify, why would we have to deal with the town farm? If we're
Well-
saying they have to have off-site units and they have to be dispersed
well,
around
no,
town.
I understand that. I
but
mean,
Go
we'll
figure
say
it
The
out.
town farm has already decided that they would sell the land to benefit the poor, and they have, kind of
You've seen, they kept 4 acres.
well, but they never said they kept 4 acres to build housing for the poor, they just,
But
I
they said-
understand, but the
point
land
is
they
that
kept
Pulte
is
has no
restricted.
obligation to do anything for the poor.
Right.
They paid money
Right.
for a piece of land.
Right,
that
they've
the
got
s-
it out from
that they-
under the restrictions, but the 4 acres is still in the restrictions.
That's,
Doesn't
yeah, but
really-
I don't know why we're talking about
I
that
don't know why we're
relative to
talking
the
about it
Pulte
anyway.
development.
we're
We're not
talking
talking
at all.
about it, we're talking about it relative to this development. But I haven't, that's not I think that it's too complicated, and I think that it's likely that they will do this second option.
Do you have a third option, which could be a combination of a cash
The money.
contribution and, I don't think it should all be cash, but could there be an option where it be some
Some
cash
cash.
and some units?
Yeah, we could do that.
What's the amount, we're gonna have to set the amount in the zoning, because otherwise it's a battle.
Well, I would say, it potentially could
But
be
we don't,
difficult
that would,
to
that would
purchase all
not
6,
help in
right?
certain other cases.
I think I don't think in this instance the cash is a good alternative, because I've been constantly hearing how we're under our quota of affordable housing, And it just, this cash contribution doesn't seem to ever go anyplace, so.
Well, and that requires the town to then be a developer.
Right.
Whereas we have a developer here.
Right, so you've
Let's let
got
them do what
step
they're good at.
A1.
Well, and
You got
also
step
if-
A1 to even develop a cash flow. You got step B to somebody to do with it. You got step C to put somebody in place as the developer to take the cash and do something. It just,
Right. Let's
if
get
you
the
really have, if you really have any sincere motive to acquire affordable housing, you just say, no, provide affordable housing.
The other thing is that if the town, of course, were the developer, prevailing wages would be, I mean, it costs a third again as much for the town to develop housing, and so it would not be money well.
Well, a longer-term conversation, or a conversation about making progress in affordable housing is really a whole nother subject, but in some places, those contributions are then distributed out to developers who are, say I'm going to do 30% affordable instead of the required 10, and help pay for that 30%, I'm getting a contribution from this fund.
We're so far from that.
I know, but but if you don't have it as an option here because you say, we don't have enough money, we'll never get enough money in there.
We can, let me try that. While you're writing up how to zone the field, I will,
I think some of the developers could find a good negotiating point at which to give the cash and save themselves a lot of trouble.
I agree with that. I don't think it should be all cash. I agree with that, but I think it also could be beneficial to have some part of it be cash.
I think you will run into some issues with the Affordable Housing Trust. Their preference is to have us produce units.
Yep.
They
Well,
don't want-
luckily, they're not here tonight.
They don't want cash. And I think that'll become an issue at town meeting if this is a provision that has to be dealt with.
well, then maybe we will think about this, because these are two options that should work.
Yeah.
As I said, it's a larger conversation about how to make progress on affordable housing. I asked Tim to share that article because this kind of 10% not making much headway on
Not making
anything.
any headway. You're just maintaining
And
your
you're barely
existing.
just treading water with it.
Look,
right?
all you're saying is, 6 units are 6 units. So you're saying as a percentage of the 450 units that we need to produce,
Right.
it's not very many, but 6 units are 6 units.
Well, yeah, but I think what Cheryl's saying is you don't actually change your ratio. You don't get any closer to the 10% because you build 54 and you
Right.
build 6,
Right.
so your ratio didn't change at all.
Didn't change it all.
I've been
Treading
saying,
water.
I've been saying this since the day I
But-
got involved with this.
Look.
The town of Milton is very developed. You're gonna have a hard time ever getting it.
We're never going to get there, but
We don't have vast tracts of land to develop neighborhood after
I think-
neighborhood.
I think you can
in
get
this
there.
place, But
what?
I think you can get there.
we'll develop a plan and get back to us.
Yeah, where could we find like 50 acres?
Tim has told me that several big comprehensive permit developments like Milton Muse will put us over the top. And I agree with that, but I'm not sure that I advocate that. It's possible, but not,
Okay, I want to bring us back to our topic here.
Yeah. So,
Anything else you want to specifically discuss on the changes? I think generally, I think your language is good. I want to tweak it. I want to look at it again after it's printed.
right,
But
exactly.
I think we're gonna have to seriously look into the septic, whether they can, you're gonna have space, and it plays into what Cheryl keeps talking about, the destruction of natural lands, either septic tanks or leaching fields are gonna consume an awful lot of space.
They're going to put a sewer in.
So I think that might have to be part of the bylaw.
Not going to be part of the bylaw.
but I think if they can demonstrate that they can do it without, and still meet the requirements of the bylaw, I'm not sure we
I agree.
that
And
we
we
need to
will have,
require it.
Just
It's-
write the
it's-
bylaw so that
it's
you're
an
requiring
age-restricted-
the
It's an
you're requiring
age-restricted
preservation of
development.
trees and above a certain caliber and whatnot, and
right,
that's how you get it.
exactly. And if they can,
If they can do it,
if
They can do it. If they
can
can't,
do
then
it.
they'll
they
run a
can,
pipe.
yeah.
Is there a
And-
difference between what keeps coming up, untouched land or open space?
Well,
Well, we should look at that.
Because when you say, can they do it? Yeah, they can do it. They can put in a tank and a leaching field and put grass over it, and it's open space.
look, the Manor House lawn may be a big
Yeah, they can
leaching
do it on the manor
field.
house lawn. Put grass over it, and it's open space. We did it.
Do we have any, is there historic documentation which would describe that part of the property? Which would,
You can ask Steve O'Donnell when he
You
comes
you
back
better
on
put
the
it there, because if
11th.
you do what I said someplace else, then you're cutting down your trees.
right. Like, does this kind of landscape here date back to when the Walcott House was built, for example? Or is this something that's evolved over time?
This was a Hemingway house, I believe.
Each one of those houses had a, as it's written in the Mass Historic Site, has a, in their database, has a certain amount. Like the Devon's house is 10 acres. The Walcott house is, I believe, 15 acres. The Manor House has its own piece of acreage. So there were, I mean, it's been assembled into one parcel, but before it was broken out.
I have 3 maps, historic maps, I think 1896, 1901, and 1903. Hemingway was actually not this property, it was really the Carberry Lane property to the left as you face it, and this is Walcott. And Walcott's on those maps. I'll bring them in next week if you'd like. But this is identified as Walcott.
I looked at
Turn of
the
the century.
atlas and thought it said Hemingway.
All right, well, I'll bring in
The
what I have.
1896 atlas, in fact.
Okay, well, maybe I'm mistaken.
Sure.
And then there were there was the Hemingway house, and then there were 2 lots where the Devon's house is, with a couple of lots, and then the Walcott house.
Well, to Cheryl's question, to bring it back to that, we'll see if these maps provide any sort of indication of forested versus farm. I think there's a way to get at some of the concerns that are being articulated, whether it be the Manor House lawn or what I call the farm field. And that is, the clear intent has been since last March when I started this discussion that those areas not to be built upon with vertical structures. And that the topography and/or the vegetation located on that, those things remain as we understand them.
So then it's a matter of the language that would help in the zoning, right?
In the zoning, right.
Right,
And if you
not
don't
the-
believe that the
yeah.
plan complies with the terminology, you would have the right to object or deny.
Okay, so,
I think there's a will, I think there's a way to get there. Is it perfect? Is it lock down every blade of grass?
I don't think it's possible to. So, after affordability.
I think your site plan design standard, the little I, needs to be much more specific,
Which one is that, Alex?
having to do with achieving a balance of cut and fill on site shall not dictate.
Did you jump ahead? Did you not want to talk about open land?
Yeah, well, open land is good too. And I think that we need to
Okay.
be very specific as to how low open land can be used. And I don't think it's specific enough.
Do you have any suggested?
The open space is going to be handled by some conservation commission or
Right.
whatever, right?
Right,
So
that's my
again,
understanding.
that plays back into what we were talking about a minute ago. Then I wouldn't assume the conservation commission would want to take open land with leaching fields or septic tanks.
It's fairly common for CRs to have permitted and prohibited uses that run with the land. It's not an uncommon thing.
I mean, the open, if you're going to have septic, the open land has to have septic fields on it. There's just no question.
But the setbacks is what you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about the open land.
Open land.
So you're saying that if the Milton Conservation Commission oversees this open land, that they're fine having leaching fields or septic tanks there?
I think that if they're not fine, we should know it.
Yeah. And when they overflow or have problems, then is the Conservation Commission responsible for
I
it?
think we should know whether or not there's a problem with the Conservation Commission.
Yeah. Or any body that's going to oversee this land.
Yeah. But I think that the no disturb zone is going to actually have a path going through it, so it will be disturbed. And the next bit of open space, I'd like to see just how that's going to be treated in more detail than what we've have
The
so
200
far.
The setback,
The
other
250
yeah.
feet. And, you know, the 125 feet along the edges, once again. Somewhat, I mean, this is, we're doing this in Pulte. We're not quite there yet, but we're doing it, being really quite specific about the open land and what its appearance is going to be.
Again, in that setback in front, I don't know why we can't leave it as left in its natural state. I know you talked about before, if a tree falls down,
Well, no, I'd like to know what the natural state is.
go walk by there tomorrow.
I've walked by there, a lot of it.
There it is. It's the natural state.
Whose is the brown or brownish?
These are previous edits, probably something from Alex.
From Alex previously, okay. Yeah, I think suitably maintained would have to be better defined. What's suitable, right?
I just assume leave it left in its natural
Yeah.
state.
We
I
did.
mean, I can't see anybody, if you ride up and down Canton Ave, this tree's over. If you ride down Unquity, this tree's over. I can't see anybody, if this develops, if there's an excessive amount of trees down that are dead wood, objecting to them clearing the dead wood. But
Well,
to
the
say,
people
but to
want-
put it on the flip side and say we're gonna suitably maintain it, that gets subjective. What do you consider suitably maintained? What do I consider? Clear all the brush, just so that the trees that
Well-
are certain diameter are left in place? That's suitably maintained? I don't know.
Well, the one, I guess what I would say is like, for example, we heard at Pulte along Unquity that there's invasive species, right? And that there's going to have to be maintenance to make sure that they don't get in the way of visibility for the bike path coming through there. And if we have a walking path through here, you wouldn't want poison ivy and invasives like taking over, you couldn't use the walking path, right? You'd have to be able to do some kind
I
of
mean, you could do
maintenance.
suitably maintained to eliminate.
People walk through the Blue Hills all the time, don't they, Cheryl? And there's nobody up there clearing the poison ivy and...
Well, you make a point there.
Actually, they are.
There are. They are
In fact,
clearing.
our conversation with DCR was that they wanted someone to mow elements of the field above this property and to maintain the path, free of invasives and other things, on the DCR land.
Mowing is not natural state.
I mean, you could certainly suitably maintain to eliminate dead wood and invasive species and keep the path clear. I think that's pretty.
So we could put that kind of limitation on it, I think.
But what if you wanted to plant a tree? That would be no good.
That would arguably no good under that
You
language,
could
right?
replace a
Why?
tree, right?
You're
But
maintaining it, maybe...
Because
the
you're not
tree-
removing
I
anything.
just cleared a tree out and I'm putting another one in.
I think that this is
We're
what
being very
I'm...
argumentative tonight.
I know that people at the Lowe's estate are angry about the open land because it is such a mess.
One of the people on Brush Hill Road, but yeah.
And the people on Brush Hill Road are angry about it because it's such a mess.
The interest of the tree houses off Unquity Road, and a couple of people have come in at different periods of time and told us, isn't that ugly with the mulch and this and that. Some people might have thought, didn't we do a beautiful job here? Doesn't it look great? Look how we've maintained it. And other people were like, you shouldn't have touched it. And I think people are content with
it's
the
subjective.
appearance of the Carberry
It is
estate.
subjective.
It's land right now. I think people are very content with its appearance.
But I bet there's no invasive, I bet it's being maintained to clear dead wood and get rid of invasive species. If that was a wall of vines along the front, people might be less happy with it.
We don't know what they're doing, but
we don't. Right.
they may
It
be,
appears that there's no
They may
vines,
be
but-
avid gardeners going out and planting a apple tree every year.
Well, if you have a walking path through it, I think you want to make sure it's a safe walking path, you know, so that you got to be able to suitably maintain around it, in my view.
I think you need to further define suitably maintain
I think so.
to include removal of dead and removal of
You can
invasive.
have a walking path up in the very rear of the area.
This one runs along the front of
No,
the
I
property.
mean,
Yeah.
a sidewalk along the front. And I'll say my piece after this, I'm curious to where that sidewalk's going, because there is no other sidewalk along Canton Ave.
It's going to
One
go
on the
through
other side of the
woods.
wall.
So you're just gonna walk from one end of the property to the other and back?
Yep. Sounds that way.
If it was up to me and I lived across the street or in the area, I'd say, leave it alone. We don't need a walking path. We're not walking there now.
I thought it was a request of the
I
neighbors.
thought that actually the neighbors will
And
be
we're gonna walk to them.
rather pleased not to have to walk on Canton Avenue,
Even if it's
I
only
mean, this is
1,500
how
feet.
long?
Yeah, it's 1,500 feet.
This is 1,500 feet of
Yeah.
not walking on Canton Avenue.
Maybe you'll encourage them to build sidewalks down the whole length of Canton Ave.
Well,
That would be nice.
what?
To some people.
Another inflammatory comment.
I'm sorry.
Well, when I
Fitting
went to
in
the
well
sidewalk,
tonight.
I was walking along Canton Avenue, and a friend saw me walking and said, "Do you need a ride? Did something happen? Why are you walking along
Right,
Canton
exactly.
Avenue?"
Why would you ever walk along Canton Avenue?
Whatever they're walking, right.
But it would have been nice to have a place off the road to walk. All right, so
It's
we need
actually
to.
really ironic that the four of you live on places that have no sidewalks.
There's a sidewalk in front of my house.
Yeah, he definitely has
Outside.
sidewalks. Yeah.
But the whole length of the street, I can walk down Canton Ave, back, the whole neighborhood, I can stay on the sidewalk no matter where I'm at.
And I
Not
have,
like Canton Ave. I can't
You don't even
get
have
to
the
that place,
street, so.
location of Canton Ave. and there's no-
but I have natural state property. 2/3 of my property, our property is natural state.
And I can access Ford Ranch Road and use their sidewalks.
All right, so we need language there. So Alex, you suggested we need to think about language similar to what we are doing at
Let's take a
Pulte.
look at Pulte, because
Yeah.
I think that
Okay.
we're getting close there, and I think that it's going to be helpful.
All right, so,
I've got a few suggestions that we can make on the site plan, just to make it a little
okay, so that goes to,
tighter.
Section 14B or 14? 14.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does seem to me that where it says, "in any measures proposed to mitigate adverse efforts," this is in number 6. And
7, too.
it seems to me that if there are adverse impacts, actually, they're going to propose measures, it's not optional. So the language would be that if there are adverse impacts, then they'll be discussed and a I was going to say
Resolution.
showing, or just a statement made as to how they'll be addressed. In other words, don't make it permissive. It's mandatory where there are adverse impacts. I think that with that sort of thing, when you get the written description of the landscape characteristics, obviously they've got to, we've got to say and describe impacts which changes may cause, something like that. And then in any event, the site plan section, it seems to me, needs some additional tightening.
So relative to impacts or other things too, Alex?
Well, more or less with respect to impacts, but beyond that, just how these impacts are going to be addressed and get a, I mean, I haven't run across a site plan that we've been given that identifies impacts that have immediately, we've used the site plan to address them. The impacts are usually identified outside of the site plan, and the site plan should be a useful document.
When you're saying site plan, you're talking about more than just one document, right? I mean, collectively, the site plan, I mean, what's
Well,
under
I
site plan?
mean, number 14 says that you'll have all this stuff in
Right.
the site plan.
Right, yeah, okay.
And I just think that we can make it even more rigorous, and should make it even more rigorous. The same is true when getting to site plan design standards. You know, where you say achieving a balance of cut and fill on site shall not dictate the level of topographical modification to be employed, but
You have better
so,
words?
so what is, where do you go from there? What shall? I mean, cuts and fills need to be
Okay, so,
reasonably necessary.
but what I was
And
trying
they need
to,
to be, we don't want 6-foot retaining walls.
what I was trying to do is, and maybe there's other ways to accomplish this than what I've done with this language, but not to have one part of the property be cut and another part be filled, to sort of make a more flat, easier to build development. That's what I'm trying to not allow. And so if the reason for doing cut and fill is to balance the site that way, then that's prohibited. So I want it to be that the cut and fill is more nuanced as the road and the buildings go.
I mean, and if they
But if
do
there's
it,
other way to do it
if they do it
language-wise.
in a nuanced way, they can do it.
Well, they won't be needing to do as much cut and fill if they do it in that nuanced way, because they
Well, I
won't be using
understand,
the
but they
retaining
still
walls.
have to do some cutting and filling.
Of course they have to do some.
All right, okay.
I think we can put a dimensional criteria to that, that a cut or a fill at any given point doesn't exceed, pick a number, 3 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, or, you know.
Okay.
I'm thinking out loud.
3 feet.
No, I'm sorry.
I hear
I mean, you know, so, you know, I'm not operating from the perspective of understanding the true granularity of a site design. I am working from the perspective of understanding in fairly specific detail of the road alignment. But
Right.
I think that we can, so that we don't have broad language that could imply that you could, you know, mine the left side of the site to fill the right side of the site, that we can find a way to.
It could be something as simple as the natural topography is going to be honored with minimum cuts not
think
to
we say
exceed, not to
something like
exceed, to Jack's
But
point, dimensional.
part of this is coming out of having the review in the Pulte application, where the language says balance of cut and fill, right? But then
They did.
It's balancing it over the whole site. And it's a lot more cut and fill than I would have liked to have seen there, but there's nothing that prohibits, really, that level. I want it tighter here because I don't want us to be in a position where we are there, where the goal was not to have to take any soil off site, so they're going to find a place to put it. Or to level it out so that they had, a bigger, flatter section in order to work. And this plan, I feel, will be totally different if that were to happen here than what we think.
Of course.
I don't think a balance of cut and fill would necessarily not, or would necessarily will accomplish what you're looking for. I think you're just looking for, like Brian said, to maintain the natural topography as best you can. But to limit the cut or fill in any area to 3 feet might be something that would help that.
Yeah, so perhaps you could look at the language that I've, but
The 3
anybody
feet
else
is
can
more
have another
significant than
idea.
you might think, because if I can cut this area 3 feet and fill this area 3 feet, I can create quite a level area.
Yeah, I mean, if you look
So
at it
it's not
across,
silly to jump onto the lowest number, because that's
Yeah, 12
relatively
feet,
significant.
right.
well, 12 feet would be too
Overly
much, and you'd
significant. That
have,
would be drastic.
you'd have huge retaining walls, which would be undesirable.
All right, you'd like 3 also.
You'd have plateaus.
Esters, I believe they're called.
So I guess if everyone can, it pops up, I think, in more than one place, right? This sort of cut and fill language,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
So, so if there's a better way to accomplish what,
Maintain the natural
articulated,
topography with
yeah.
cuts no greater than 3 feet and fills no greater than 3 feet.
well, we should say unless somehow gives demonstrated to
Well,
be a necessity or what have you,
It'll
right?
be-
Give a little bit of,
Whatever is written will be subject to review again.
okay. All right, so what else was there?
That's it.
So why don't we do
And it's
this?
the affordability,
Why
I
don't-
mean, it's the unit count.
Yeah, so why don't we do this? Let's let,
I'm sorry, just traffic.
just traffic.
I mean,
There
there
needs
was
to
a
be
lot
ref-
of concern
There
about
needs to be a
traffic,
reference to
so.
traffic, a traffic study in here. We've
Right, we
talked
have
about
that, but is everyone looked at that? I mean, I put this in partially
it
based
looked
on Mr. Connors.
Okay to me.
Tell me where it is.
It's on
Oh, I see it. Yep.
It looks okay to Alex? Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
So let's jump to the public quickly, come back to unit count, and then we'll have a final draft to look at between now and the 16th for the public hearing.
Now, you do have a meeting next week.
Yes, we'll probably talk about it then as well, but we have other things on the agenda,
Right.
correct? Right.
it'll be on which meeting? Not next week, but which
The
one?
16th is the public hearing on these two. 16th,
Oh, the 16th, sorry, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. The 9th,
Getting
we
ahead of
will
myself.
likely be talking about this, though.
Okay, all right.
Okay, does anyone here wish to speak from the public? I know there's someone here. Who wants to go first?
Try to be different.
Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Tony Chicello. As you know, I represent Jack Weeks, one of the abutters here. I'm going to be brief tonight and not repeat some of the things that we've talked about in the past. I thought the discussion tonight about the development agreement was very interesting. I think that can be a very helpful tool in terms of protecting the interests of the neighbors. I understand Ms. Tagayas's concerns about the fact that we might not have the level of detail that we might all want, and that would provide more protection. But I think that there's quite a bit that can be done with the development agreement to detail processes, to detail important factors and protections, and accountability, things that can and can't be done. I do think that there is a very important role for the planning board here. Folks deal with these issues all the time. I see the development agreement as it's not zoning. It's a little bit different than what's been done before. It doesn't take the place of the bylaw. It doesn't take the place of the special permit. They both have their own distinct roles. The development agreement is a contract. It's not really zoning. But to the extent that the developer makes an agreement, the developer is bound by that. So, for example, if the zoning might permit additional configurations or uses, in the development agreement, the developer binds him, herself, itself to do certain things and not to do certain things. And that provides the kind of protection I think that the neighbors are going to be looking for. Clearly, the devil's in the details, and there is a lot of work to be done. I think that I would suggest that as you go through your work here and address this, and neighbors talk to you about issues, it may be that, I know I'm sort of keeping a list of things that we really need to make sure we nail down in the development agreement. You folks may have those concerns as well. I would suggest a robust involvement of the planning board in some fashion in the development of that document. I think it's very important. So that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Kirk Connors, representing Kevin Walker. To pick up that topic just a little more, I'm not sure that my client has a position on the development agreement. I know that his concern is that, kind of along the lines of, I think, what Ms. Tagayas was saying, that if we don't get it in the plan and count on it coming in the development agreement down the road, like, oh, get it on the warrant, and we'll work it all out later, that we're not going to get what we were looking for. And you can't do every detail, but we want to lock the critical details, and obviously the number of units and density is first and foremost, but also defining the playing field of, what setbacks are going to be in play for this development, and making sure that those are reflected in the bylaw itself and not in a later agreement that may or may not come and that the selectmen may or may not enforce. I know that that's a question, a concern that some on the board have raised previously of the selectmen as the holder of it, how or if do they enforce it? There was also the question, I think, that was raised several meetings ago about what if Northland walks away from this but wants to sell the development rights to somebody else? Does the development agreement automatically flip to the next developer, or does it at some point vanish because that same developer isn't sitting in the chair? So I'd want to make sure that all those issues are investigated, and I guess that brings us to, I guess there was a dispute among the board whether there's time to pull all this together for town meeting. My client's concern is not to rush this, to take the time. If you're going to do a development agreement, do it right, do the zoning bylaw right, and it doesn't sound like there's time to pull all that together before the May town meeting. And if that's the case, I'd ask us to recognize that, kind of end this fire drill, and keep meeting and keep putting in the time to make a good bylaw and maybe a good development agreement. But maybe ask Northland to push for a fall special meeting or maybe next year like Ice House had to do to get this done. In terms of the 44 units, you heard my client last week, a couple weeks ago, that at this point, other than Mr. Weeks, I'm not sure that there's anybody who's come forward saying that they're in favor of 58 units. He represents Mr. Weeks. He said he's overheard other people speaking. I represent Mr. Walker. I've overheard other people speaking about it. But I think the most compelling testimony about it is from Hale Smith, who's the president of the Neighborhood Association, which is 30-plus members, who said they took a vote on it, and the only thing that they agreed on was 44 units. So sitting here right now, we're talking about 58 units. It sounds like, with what Mr. Whiteside was saying, we may be down to 52 of the, I guess, the non-affordable, the market rate units. And actually, Tim, do you have that map of the latest from Northland?
Oh, there we go.
And when Kevin Walker was here last time, he did it kind of quickly on the board, but I just want to make sure that, when we say 44 units, we're not just talking about, general density or kind of in vague terms. He was talking very specifically, and when we say units, we're not talking about, we're not talking about 14 buildings. We're talking about 7 buildings. And the 7 that he referenced were those first 5 at the bottom, which I know Mr. Whiteside was talking about, that there's an existing home there that he'd like to see stay. And, in terms of when you're going down Canton Avenue, if you look up and you see those 5 units, no matter how it looks from this aerial view, that's what you're seeing is density from the street, and that's going to impact what we're calling a great estate. It takes away that feeling of what is currently a great estate up there. And the other two units that Mr. Walker referenced were in the upper right-hand corner that are proximate to the Carberry Trail, and concerns about having too much development near that. So that's what they're looking for. It's him, but I think it's the neighborhood association. It's a number of people. We've got Mr. Weeks on the other side, and he's certainly entitled to his opinion. And I want him to speak it, but it just seems that the weight of public opinion is not in favor of anything that's on the table. The 44 units is the one number that I think everyone has coalesced around, and I'm assuming that Mr. Weeks would be okay if it wound up being 44 units as well. I did submit some additional bylaw revisions. I'll let you guys digest those. I'm anxious to get a copy of what Mr. Dolly submitted. I'll take a look at that for next time, if Tim could email it to me. For traffic, I do anticipate that we will come forward with some information. I'm not sure that we'll have it by next week, but I do anticipate we'll have it at least by the public meeting to talk about the impact of, and particularly whether this is a D to F type situation that we're looking at under the current proposal or under the alternative 40B proposal, which is obviously incredibly more dense than what we're discussing. The last piece is, I know my client, and I added language in my draft of the bylaw about this, is looking for an open land management plan, or which could include the no disturbance land as well, to make sure that if something happens on that land, that neighborhood association and that holder of that conservation restriction knows exactly what to do and when to do it and how they're going to fund it. So I think those are the key topics until I've had a chance to review what Mr. Dolly provided. Thank you very much.
If you could get us that traffic information as far in advance of the 16th as possible, that would be helpful. I understand there will be a time of when you get it, but even the day before is helpful to not get it that night.
Okay,
for the
it may
board.
come by the 9th. I talked to our engineer yesterday. He's out for the next few days. He said he would push, but he was very comfortable that for sure before the 16th or by the 16th.
Ideally, we have it over the weekend, but we understand if you can't get it by
It
then.
will come imminently.
Great,
as quickly as
thank you.
possible.
And then, Tim, just, I know Mr. Connor just got a copy, but I assume that this language is on the website or will be prior to the 16th.
For the
All the different versions, the version that we were just talking about.
If
So
that's what you're interested in, we can do that.
I think with the one we just reviewed, which is the comments with Dolly and Cheryl's language, should be on the website. Yeah.
And can we have Mr. Connors and Mr. Dolly's sent email to us? I find it a lot easier to follow when they're in the color of the strikes, and
think
you
we
can
have
see who
them.
did
You
what.
did get email.
We got 'em.
Oh, we did?
I sent it in Word version this time,
Yeah,
just in case you decide to pick up more of my language.
I sent
thank you.
Like I sent out yesterday.
I
Jack
missed that.
comments we just got
Okay.
this
afternoon.
afternoon.
You sent it
so-
yesterday?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah, I
missed
apologize.
it.
I obviously don't have any of your emails, so I sent it to Tim and Bill
Okay.
and Brian.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi there.
Good evening. Ted Phillips, 28 Hemlock Drive. I'm also treasurer of the Blue Hills Neighborhood Association. I'll try to just go in order.
Sorry, could you just let us know who you're speaking on behalf of?
Oh, tonight, the Blue Hills Neighborhood Association.
Thank you.
To the best of my ability. There
Thank
might
you.
be a few personal comments I'll throw in there. The Neighborhood Association would very much support keeping of the house that was talked about earlier, closest to the road. It's our understanding it was put up in 1940, but it was a wing of another house that was dragged down the hill. So I do believe the structure is actually older. It's just placed there relatively early. And we do like to look at it as we go by. As to number of units, you've heard already that the Neighborhood Association does like 44. We are working under the hypothesis that there is a number somewhere between 44 and 58 that is very doable for Northland and would be more profitable than a 40B development. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't have any evidence to share with everybody that's suitable to make my case. We are working on that. I unfortunately don't have a timeline when I have anything to share either. armed with that hypothesis, or being able to prove that hypothesis, would allow us to negotiate from a position of, here's a number that is better than a 40B, and we all know that the only reason we're having this meeting in the last 712 meetings is because of the threat of 40B. So it would be nice for us to be able to continue with that strategy. If we go ahead and do move forward with the zoning amendment as written, or with 58 units in, our negotiating strategy then changes from this would be better than 40B, so knock it off, to we have to provide incentive that is equal to or better the profit of 58 market units to be able to buy down the density in the neighborhood. So obviously that would jump up our costs and also significantly change any negotiating stance we might have. As to the use of going back to a formula where we're on number of units, a 45 acres was mentioned earlier. The plan and the legend off to the side, which you can't see on the screen at the moment, says 47 acres. That's significant in that if you calculate the 58 units with 45 and you get a ratio and then multiply it by 47, you'd end up with 60 plus units. So let's be a little careful with the math when we put that on. The old version that had the formula also talked about usable acres, and I don't know the definition of usable acres. Would wetlands be included? Would the no development zone be included? Would the no build zone be included? Again, so we just have to be careful with the mathematics of that calculation if we're going to do it as a ratio, and be careful with the definitions. Moving on to the setbacks and height, I happy the 75 feet no disturbance zone got put in and defined. We would also be interested in a no disturbance zone along Walcott Trail. 4 weeks ago, I think, last time I was here, we talked briefly about it. Mr. Corcoran indicated that Northwood wouldn't have any problem with preserving that, as it's a nice buffer anyway. I wouldn't hold him to that comment, but I think they would be in agreement with that type of thing as well. And I would imagine it would be nice to have something similar along the Carberry side of the property as well. 8 in the building units. We talked about, again, 4 weeks ago, about the possible use of triplexes. As stated here in the draft I'm looking at, there's no limit to the number of triplexes, so as zoning is stated here, I think they could do all triplexes. It would be nice if there was some sort of limit. I like 0, but some kind of limit of no more than 3, no more than 4.
Quickly address that. So you don't have the benefit of the copy that we have. But
yeah, sorry.
The applicant has suggested in a comment 1/20th of new building units, just so you know there's been an
okay, so that would work out
Yep.
to 3.
Right. So just
Okay.
FYI.
Thank you. Moving toward open land, and actually this also goes to the site plan. A number of places recognizes the fact there are significant trees, and there are certain portions of the land that might not have individual significant trees, but I think would have a significant stance of trees. Or again, I'm thinking of Walcott Path, and there's a couple other places, but Walcott Path specifically, where there might not be more than a couple really significant trees, as somebody might define it, but the stand of trees would be considered significant. I don't know if there's some way to have the significant stands at least identified within the site plans for consideration of preservation, or at least some kind of discussion. Same comment. And then I think the last thing is the neighborhood would very much endorse the development plan and the more specificity about not only what's being built, but in the manner that it might be built, along the lines of when construction could happen, what route construction vehicles would use, et cetera, et cetera. Canton Avenue is a no-truck road, so obviously that is going to be, have to be dealt with. Obviously, there will be trucks on Canton Avenue, but, you know, what about some of the other roads? You know, there shouldn't be anything on Carberry. How about Hemlock Drive? How about Dollar Lane? You know, we'd prefer not to have truck traffic down the side roads as well. If they can just come in and out of Canton, that would be better. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Okay, so I think just before we wrap up, does anybody wish to, on the board here, wish to speak to unit count? Looks like we've right now got...
I do.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you raising your hand. Well,
As
please.
do I.
I'm sure you do. Do you want to hear the applicant first? Who wants the final word?
I have mixed feelings about hearing from the applicant first, but that's all right. We'll,
It's up to you.
let's see what he has to say.
All right, fair enough.
Well, I said 3 weeks ago, and I repeat tonight, unless someone shows us the money and buys down the unit count, 58 market rate units is the minimum number of units that will be developed on this site. We will not take the risk of producing 6 affordables elsewhere and not being able to do it. So we will not do 52 market rate units. So the number needs to be 64 units with a preference and authorization to develop 6 units off-site. We will work to get there. If we can get there by town meeting, we'll adjust the language at town meeting. We can adjust it down. I'm not sure you can adjust it back up. But that is a non-starter. It is a fundamental decision point that we need to address in this bylaw.
Okay, thank you. We'll have deliberations and then we'll move to the 16th or the 9th.
I knew that I didn't want to hear that.
Well, it's out there. We was already out there.
Inconsistent.
It does seem to me that what we know is that a standard subdivision, Residence A, Residence AA, standard subdivision, which is they're entitled to do as of right, would be awful. It would be a terrible thing. It would be a tragedy. And I suppose a standard subdivision is, I don't know what the finances are, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't make some money doing a standard subdivision. A 40B is possible, I guess. I don't, and I expect that they would try and do something quite nice with a 40B, but they would do, we'd probably do townhouses and probably come up with in excess of 100. I think that's quite feasible, and I think that they would make a profit doing it, and whether or not the profit would be greater than a standard subdivision, I suspect that it might be. I don't know. I suspect it might be. In any event, the 40B threat is out there, and we have the neighborhood saying that they would like to do 44 units, and the developer saying that's a no-go, we want 64 units. So where I come out is that in this provision of affordable housing piece that I have given to you, I have a procedure by which 6 affordables can be produced off-site without any significant risk to the developer. So I think that the non-negotiable 64 is actually negotiable to 58, and that we should provide for 58. And I know the neighborhood says 44, and they say we're working on figuring out why 44 is the right number. At town meeting, you can always reduce the number of units because you can't increase it without it being a change to the zoning that had the proposed zoning that wasn't advertised or heard, but you can reduce it. So I think that 6 affordables off-site are reasonably possible, and we should take them as a given and provide for 58 total units on-site. That's my conclusion.
Okay. Mike?
I don't have much more to say other than I'd like the neighborhood association to have the opportunity to analyze the situation. I thought I heard to talk about buying down or coming to a conclusion on what is a profitable number of units, or at least evidence to explain to themselves what is or isn't. And I understand the reasoning behind, the hurry. I think nothing's gained by doing things in a hurry.
Okay. Cheryl?
I think Alex laid out a thoughtful case for why that number makes sense. So I would be in agreement with Alex.
Okay. I tend to agree. I think these 6 units, if they were allowed on site, would need to be designated as having to be affordable if we did go to 64. So it would have to specifically state that there were only 58 market rate units allowed on site. If we allowed 64, 58 of them only would be market rate housing. So I'm on the fence, but I hear everybody's perspective on this. One second. As to the 44 and the buy down, I think that I have mixed feelings about it personally, but I believe that is something that really needs to be worked out with the different parties, and the planning board needs to look at this as what are our alternatives. And certainly if we come up with a bylaw that puts 58 units here, there's absolutely nothing that requires them to build 58 units. So there would be no prescription against continuing to work hard towards that buy down and putting it into a deed restriction instead, which would effectively moot the zoning from a unit count perspective. So I think, as Alex points out, we can always reduce at town meeting. We can continue to work towards that endeavor, but even if town meeting passes 58, there would be no reason that the 2 private parties couldn't continue to negotiate on that basis. So, Cheryl, you had another comment?
In light of what we're talking about, I want to suggest again that we think about allowing a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust, understanding that the trust would need to be able to increase its capacity to do things, but oftentimes trusts are used as leverage for private developers to actually build the units. So it could be that money could be put to good use for what it's intended for, and allow for this reduction from 64 to 58, and take away some of the risk of not being able to get that done in the same time frame as the rest of the development. So
I guess I think that's an interesting point. I think I'd put back to the applicant that, perhaps they can think about what a contribution would be that would be acceptable, financial contribution that might be acceptable if the board were to give 58 units.
We had proposed some language, an earlier version, when we were discussing the notion of producing off-site. There's an alternative would be the payment into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at an amount that is equal to the net cost of the production of an affordable unit on-site.
Can you quantify that?
And it can be quantified. The general quantification today is that from a bricks and sticks perspective only, not allocating other costs of development to the affordable units, but to produce an affordable unit is about $400,000. The sale price is capped at about $193,000. So that gets you on a net cost basis, $210,000. Those numbers can be refined, but that's the ballpark that we have been working with. You know, that sort of allows for a, you know, $400,000 acquisition of a piece of property and a conversion, and then a resale may or may not cost a little more, you know, on the acquisition side. I know that the goal is to achieve acquisition and production, but I think that's not an unreasonable approach to valuing the production of a unit. Because if there's a net cost to produce it at $210,000, then whether he produces it on site or makes a contribution off-site is a wash. That's easy. So if the board's willing to consider that, that makes it easier for us to think about accepting the risk of producing.
Okay, thanks. So I think we have to think about the number and what the number might be. And I think we should probably get a consultation with affordable housing if we're going to proceed down that route, because I think we want to be careful about having a town meeting situation where the boards are not aligned on that situation. And I also think that, you know, Alex made a good point earlier, the town's going to have to pay a third more, and we're not necessarily as good at it. And if we have $210,000 in the bank to develop a unit, and we never develop the unit, all we've actually done is put money in the bank, and we've actually worsened our ratio because we have 60 more housing units or 58 more housing units, but no corresponding affordable. So we just have to be careful how we have to make sure we're all on the same page here with the trust.
I think that's fine, and I agree we should consult with the trust, but I also think the trust should look at what other towns have done and what other towns are doing, because other towns are using funds to help build.
And I
you wanna
agree
add to that?
completely with you on being able to fund an affordable project. I'm actually working with a couple of different people now, trying to place something like that, and they're always looking for
Yes.
funding.
I mean, we've explored a number of different options in terms of our own plan to achieve off-site affordability. You know, if zoning passes for the ice house and it allows 12 units, it might be that, you know, we contribute to the cost of developing 3 of those as affordable units. So it'd be, rather than 10% affordable at that location, you achieve an additional set of affordables through the contribution from this site. That's an example. We've made 2 offers to receivers of distressed properties to see whether or not we can acquire them, fix them up and sell them. That we're actively in the process of identifying properties and making offers so that we can give ourselves comfort on this issue of managing the risk. We're not just sitting here saying, we're actively engaged in that.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Just back to the count and going to town meeting and be able to go down, that's fine, but tangent to the point of making, I'm reading an article today that says that there's some extraordinary number of people that turn 65 in this country every day, and that 55 and over communities are far accelerating any other market in the home building market, and it's going to be for quite the future. With that said, I don't want to be an adversary of developers or people coming in here with developments, but I feel as though I represent the people of the town of Milton, and to say we can go to town meeting with 58, and they can always work out later and break it down, in my mind, you're putting the people, the neighborhood association, you're putting them in a bargaining position that stinks.
Yeah, we're in a
So
bargaining.
I'd like to give them the
Mike, we're in a
opportunity.
bargaining position that stinks.
Well, I'd
right?
like
We
to-
got subdivision, 40B, and this, so that's where we are. We have a
I think
bargaining
it's
position that
unreasonable of a
stinks.
developer not to give the community, the neighbors, an opportunity to do some financial investigation and come back to them with the
Giving them a
buy
number.
down or either a buy down or a number that they see as affordable.
We've given
As far as
them a
the
number.
development.
They have a number.
They know it.
They know your number, they
That's
should
the
have an
number.
opportunity to develop a number from their side, that's
That's the number.
negotiation.
I've also heard from DCR that DCR has been asked to evaluate its ability to become the entity that holds the development and is the entity through which the purchase is made. The question is, where's the money behind it? We don't know.
Okay, we're going to move
Got
on.
to get here.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be back to this likely on the 9th, but we have a public hearing on it on the 16th. We likely will talk about this on the 9th, but no guarantee. It will depend on how much time we have. Okay. Have a good evening. We're moving on to
Oh, lucky you.
the Blue Hill Ice or Ice House property. I don't even know the address. We're on Blue Hill Avenue. 487 Blue Hill Parkway.
You have a red line copy of the language from Mr. Corcoran that should be labeled
NC edits.
NC edits, and then you have a red line edit from Brian that should be labeled BWF edits.
And that's the same that was received last time, except it changed it to 12 and 33%, correct? Okay. So 12 units instead of 24 and 33% FAR instead of 40 was the modification. So I think before we go into any detail on this discussion, we really need to talk about, where the board sits on the proposal and the density, and whether the delving into it any further is even necessary.
I was just thinking today that relative to our conversation earlier tonight, spot zoning, it seems as though developers come forward and we develop bylaws to accommodate, to work with them, to get something done on a particular property. I'm wondering if this is the first time in my involvement with the planning board, we're developing a bylaw to set up a potential development, with not a real
Without the
concrete
developer in the
any
room, you mean?
type of. And again, I understand Mr. McKean's position, and if I was in his shoes, I think I'd be doing the exact same thing to the extent, but what it seems like we're doing here is we're developing a bylaw to allow the property owner to get the best bang for their buck. And from the property owner's standpoint, I understand that completely. But we also have an obligation to protect the town of Milton, and again, the residents that we represent. So I still think it's a very dense development for that piece of land. And I'm very negative on seeing a traffic signal and changing the parkway. I know George Collins used to say, why do we drive on a parkway and park on a driveway? And I thought that made a lot of sense until somebody come up here and said, it's called a parkway because it's the entrance to a park, which is the Blue Hills. I understand better the term parkway. And to disturb that, in my mind, is not a good thing.
Alex?
Well, I made a proposal, as you recall, and I said, do a market, 10 to 14,000 square feet, and the difference between 16,000 and the size of the market would be available for commercial, and that there would be 6 to 12,000 square feet for some residential. And then you, Brian, said, well, I've done some thumbnail calculations, and this doesn't seem to work. But I'll look into it more, but you thoughtfully realized that that was not your department, that it was actually the developer's department to come in and show us that it didn't work. But the developer decided, demurred. They came in with no figures. But I think that they would be agreeable to your proposal for whatever, 20,000 square feet of 18,000, how much business space
16.
total?
I think it's 16 total.
16,000,
16,000 business,
14,000 square foot maximum market, 10,000 minimum, 12 units.
plus 12 units.
We've agreed, we agree to that.
And I think it's a very dense development. It's not a, it doesn't, maybe that's what is needed. Maybe you can't develop, maybe a market is just a bad use, period, that no one should develop markets because no one wants to develop markets, that commercial development without attached residential development doesn't work. That's sort of what I'm hearing, that encouraging commercial development in Milton is chasing a will-o'-the-wisp. People do want a market, and I made a proposal which seemed to me reasonable. We had an indication that it might not be, and we said to the applicant, come in and show us that this is reasonable, and or that what I proposed, this is reasonable and what I propose is unreasonable. But the applicant has determined to provide no financials and simply say, we'll take the 16,000 plus 12 units. And I don't think it fits on site. The other problem that I found with Brian's draft was parking in front of the market along the parkway. I think that would be a huge mistake. All the parking has to be in back of the building. That the market be a two-floor building, I think, is a big mistake because at night, you would have a line of illuminated windows facing the parkway, and it would look exactly like a very large apartment building and would destroy a fair amount of the ambiance of the parkway. During the day, I don't think it would be particularly attractive. I don't think housing over a market is a good planning idea. There is a very suitable way of dealing with residential use in a separate building. But I sort of get back to Cheryl's idea. Show us what you want to do. I have a view of what should be done here. It's a green strip along the parkway with a building, a low building with a pitched roof, maybe some dormers, maybe an overhang with columns, which would look Monticello-like from the parkway and would be an attractive view from the parkway. You go into the development, and there the front of the market would be facing the parking lot in back of the market building, with the residential building on the far side. In my aesthetic judgment, it would be nice. It would be really nice. But I'm not if you take out some of the requirements that I put in, I think you're setting up for something that would be too dense and probably quite unattractive. So I'm inclined to, I still think that what I proposed is reasonable, and the applicant hasn't shown me that it's unreasonable. Just saying no, I don't think is good enough. So that's where I am.
Okay, very good. I want to respond to a couple of things there, because this has been a challenging process for me in a way, because without sounding boastful, I think I might know too much in this particular case. Doing what I do every day, day in and day out, I have to balance being a planning mind with what everybody would want to see, which I think the vision that was just put on the table sounds delightful, with the economic realities and the market realities of creating something that will actually function, if we're going to do a project here. And the reality is, I think you can do commercial development in Milton in certain locations, probably, and figure out a way to do a market. But the reality is the price of the land will dictate how much density you need on any development if you're the developer. And I think in this case, much like where we are with Carberry, we're bargaining with a bad bargaining table, because we have this overarching threat of density on this site, which drives up its value, market value, arguably. I would love to see a market here, just a market. It would be great. I just don't know if it works. And I agree, Alex, they have not told us it didn't work. I played around with numbers and said it might not, but it's, as you point out, and I pointed out after I thought about it, it's not my job to do that, and it's their job to do that. You know, I think if we conclude one way or the other, if there's the right density, I think all the other details get worked out, whether the parking's predominantly in the back with a little bit in front or all in the back. I think we can work all that out. But I think ultimately here, I don't think, it doesn't seem to me like you have four supported, you don't have three, it doesn't seem like you have three people on this board that are going to support 12 units above 16,000 square feet. So I'm not sure the board needs to, if it's going to be all for naught. That's my opinion. I don't think we should spend a lot of time crafting a bylaw for essentially a specific property if the property owner has no interest in that bylaw.
If just because of present conversations, if any place loaned itself to a development agreement, I think this would be it. But we can't develop.
Well, you can't
because it's
the developer isn't here. Right?
Exactly. But and again, I don't make this to seem cruel, because in your shoes I'd be shooting for the sky. But I don't see why it's not necessary for us to craft a bylaw that maximizes profit. You say the land's only value is, you know, what you can do with it, but so.
No, I actually would commend the applicant, because I think many other people would have just sold this out to a developer who wasn't from Milton and would have just would do whatever maximizes the profit here and maybe minimizes the process. I think there was a genuine interest in trying to do what was right here while also maximizing property value, and I think they should be commended for that. We should have a public hearing on this on the 16th, but I don't know what we're having a public hearing on at this point. Actually, so now that I'm going to actually just go in a complete circle there. I'm not sure we should have a public hearing on this on the 16th.
Well, I think we should keep it open and see if it just seems that we haven't gotten due diligence from this applicant. I mean, just saying no is to something that is not transparently unreasonable just doesn't seem to me the right way to do it, especially when you're asking for something, you're asking to do something totally different from anything else in the neighborhood. It seems to me that the due diligence required for this sort of a project should be significant, and I don't see that there's been a lot of due diligence. Maybe we can, if I knew what the right number was, the right number of commercial, whether or not it really has to be anchored by a bank, because they're the only people who spin out enough money to make a commercial development like this work, together with residential, which is, 10% affordable, but I mean, at one point they were talking 25% affordable, and that's the same as a comp permit, and how it could carry the commercial development as well as the residential development, I don't understand it. And so because I don't understand it, I tend to doubt it. And so I think that we should leave it on the list, but
So it sounds like we're going to leave it on the list. We're going to talk about it on the 16th. You can submit whatever additional materials you wish to, as can the public, and we'll have a full board that night, well, minus the one non-participating member, and you'll probably have a vote one way or the other for the article.
No, I appreciate that, and if we can't get it closer, then, we have our alternatives, and
Yep, very good.
appreciate your time. I know you guys have worked hard at trying to find a way to get there. We've worked hard to find a way to get there, and I appreciate the owner's willingness to play this out, because, a year ago, I'm surprised the trees didn't get cut down.
We've seen that happen in this town already.
I know, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Can I have a motion?
yeah.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thank you.